Okay, looks like we just got connected, and I will send the link to Dr. Chasnal. We have to wait till Instagram kind of notifies. Hi Ashrita, how are you? Hi Dr. Chasnal. I'll send you the link, doctor. Hi,
Hey, hi, Dr. Harish. How are you?
I'm good. How are you doing? Is your
Good,
hospital
good.
duty
Same here.
on?
Yeah, I had a clinic today and follow-up OPD, seeing some post-op patients, some fractured kids.
Okay, I know doctor's duty will
Mm,
not stop irrespective of the COVID and so many things. So tell me something,
yeah,
is it clear from my end, the audio and everything? So if
yeah, it's
yes,
clear. How?
we can get
Yeah.
started. I can already see many people are live with us here. So
Hmm.
hi guys, good evening. This is Dr. Harish and I hope you all are doing safe and sound. So we are here with our third live series of the second live series which we have extended. And Dr. Chasnal Rathod, who is an eminent pediatric surgeon, is here with us for the third time. So thank you, Dr. Chasnal, for accepting this invite and joining once again for the third time in this live series. To extend the support for our parents in some whatever way we can. A big thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Harish, and it's been really nice. I mean, I've been following your other nice live sessions, and you have tried to cover like each and every topic. I think it's amazing, and I hope the audience and our parents, the patients
Yes,
who are with us, they are just enjoying it.
right. End of the day, it has to be productive. So
Hmm.
that's fine. So, doctor, today's topic is about management of CP in a very holistic way. So, I have questions. We will follow the same protocol what we did last time, and we will look for the questions from my side where parents have put it up, whatever they felt, and we will go through the online questions if anything pops up here. Okay. So, I'll
Yeah.
put across my first question. Now, when we talk about CP, the first thing every parent is scared is about surgery. So the first question is about the surgery. So what is ideal age we should consider, when we think about surgery? And what clinical pointers we should consider for a child to take a decision whether we should undergo surgery or no?
Okay. Yeah, so for a cerebral palsy child, I think it is important that we don't consider all kids like similar, or they're not, each of them is not same. Each one could be having different pathology or different deformities or different problems. So I think what you put up in the second question, that what should be the clinical pointers, I would like to emphasize on that,
Yes,
because maybe there's some kid who needs a surgery at a very young age, maybe at 2 3, while someone just needs doesn't need any surgery till age 10 as well. So if we put this clinical pointers, I think we could divide it based on the child. So how the child is, what kind of spasticity the child has, and secondly, how much brain involvement the child is having at the time of the brain damage. And
correct.
second, third, if there is any recent growth in the height, like a growth spurt. So even that could be one of the reasons why there is an increase in deformity or why a contracture has come in. So I think kids related or the child related, there could be some of these reasons. In terms of the caregivers related, now the parents could be having some different expectations from the child. So most
Correct.
of the times, the common expectation parents have is, will my child start walking post
Right.
surgery? So we need to be very realistic about this point, that not necessarily all the surgeries are going to make the child mobile. Some of the surgeries, yes, they are going to make the walking pattern much more better. Some surgeries are going to correct the deformities, and some surgeries are going to help positioning the child better or managing the child better. So again, from the parent point of view, I think we need to discuss with them what are their goals and just decide for the surgery. And from caregivers like you and me, we clearly know that when the deformities are progressing, when the deformities are fixed, and
Right.
we think that now with, like, from your point of view, you think that therapy is not helping much. and we
Right.
feel that now the therapies come to one end point or a plateau and now we need to do some intervention, yes, you will certainly insist upon the family and to get a intervention done. And for me, it is like from the surgeon's point of view, yes, if there is any contracture, if the muscle length is short, a surgery would be needed. If the spasticity is increasing in spite of medications, a Botox injection would be needed. And if these are not required, then maybe a splinting or therapy can be always considered.
Correct, correct. So just to conclude what you mentioned, can we categorize, you clearly mentioned we have to consider the level of severity, and we just make a category, we fit in GMFCS 1, 2, and 3, and then we have 4 and 5. And we look at the mobility and functional abilities of the child versus, how comfortable the caregiving is for the parents.
Right.
And as you rightly said, maybe, not every surgery is targeted towards mobility. It could be related to hand function. It could be related to, posture. So I think very true. Like, if it can help the child to get better one step ahead, maybe we can consider the surgery. But if it is not needed, we may not want to unnecessarily interfere with that.
Right.
Right. So that also is a very valid point. So the second question, especially in children with dystonia, now that's one of the difficult children we come across. What role of surgery can we look at?
Yeah. So like I first said that a lot of surgeries depend on where the brain is involved at the time of birth. So for the parents who are here and those who are non-medical professionals, we know that cerebral palsy is caused because of delayed cry or some brain damage which has caused less oxygenation to the brain, or some infections in the early 21 days, which we called as perinatal period of life. So these problems, we could just see if there is one particular part of the brain that is in the behind part. And if that is involved, then what happens is dystonia. So what we are talking here is dystonia is like abnormal movements which are not in the control. We are sudden movements, jerky movements, or movements which the child cannot have a control over. So this is dystonia. Right. So classically, these dystonics, they don't do much well with a lot of surgeries because the dystonia is not a fixed pattern. The pattern could be always different. The child would behave different at home. The child would behave different in a crowded place. The child would react differently to the music or some loud sound or sudden sudden clapping or anything. So usually we don't recommend much of surgeries, but what I would suggest if at all something is really troubling and coming in the way of mobility therapy or ambulation, then we can consider the least is a botulinum toxin injection with a stretch plaster. And for older kids, I would suggest a nerve procedure, which is called selective motor fasciculotomy, which takes away a lot of abnormal tone from one particular muscle. So if we can pinpoint one particular muscle, this surgery is really very effective. And for the upper extremity, this works very well. That is for the hand function, it works really well.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So the third question is, when we talk about children with CP, especially GMFCS 4 and 5, hip and spine is one part where we need constant surveillance, and we discussed in our previous live sessions also. Yeah. So considering to, coming to that, when is it ideal to consider hip surgery of a child with CP, especially in cases of subluxation and dislocation?
Okay. Yeah. So like we said, the GMFCS 4 and 5 kids are the ones who don't walk. So GMFCS is the functional status of the child. So when these kids don't walk, the first thing to get affected is their hip joints, and they start subluxating. That is, the hip starts dislocating because of the posture, because of the spasticity or deformity. So so the best thing is to start doing serial X-rays of the hip joint, that is of the pelvis. And for the GMFCS 4 and 5 levels, these X-rays should be started really early, before age 2 also. So for the walking kids, we would prefer X-rays at age 2, 4, 6, 8. But for a non-walking child, we would prefer X-rays like really early age and very often, that is every 6 months and
Correct.
even less if necessary. And the moment the hip starts subluxating more than 30%, a procedure would be required. So we don't have to wait till much longer for the hip to dislocate. So even a mild subluxation beyond 30% is an indication for a surgery, maybe a soft tissue surgery, not a bony procedure. And prior to that, I think as a part of therapy, we should insist on having an abduction bar or a small pillow between
Correct.
the two legs and while positioning the child.
Correct. So we have, categories where children are into GMFCS 5 who are completely bedridden or wheelchair bound. So in those cases, definitely mobility is challenged. So I have had many children, in their adolescent phase, the hip has come out, but it's not painful. So would you still want to consider surgery in such adolescent people?
Yeah, so if the hips are painful, that means they need a different type of surgery. So those will
Okay.
be salvage procedures where probably the head of the femur has to be removed. But
Okay.
before so that is not a very good procedure because that is like
Correct.
we have no option. This is like something we are just left with nothing kind of thing.
Correct. Correct.
So it is always good to screen these hips and treat them as early as possible because the earlier we treat, the less procedures and the less invasive the surgeries. Because once the hip dislocates, it requires a much more bigger surgery, many more steps in the surgery from a surgeon's point of view. So I think age is not a thing to consider here in hip surgeries. I think what we should consider is the hip X-ray and the amount of subluxation.
Correct. But what if the hip is not painful?
Yeah, I know it is difficult to convince parents because the child is not going to walk because if we weigh the pros and cons, it's like we are just treating the X-ray here. So the hip is going to become painful sometime of the point in future.
Correct.
Because what
Correct.
happens once the femur is out of the joint, the cartilage, so our joints, the bones which are in the joint, they have a cartilage over it. So this cartilage
Right.
starts getting denuded. I mean, I have seen hip joints in surgeries when we remove the femoral head, we see that there is so much of cartilage which is damaged and there is a bone which is bare. So once this cartilage is damaged, there are nerve endings which get exposed. And these nerve endings, when exposed, they cause pain. So now we are waiting that the hip is subluxated and we are waiting for the cartilage to get damaged. So I think we can certainly avoid that.
Right. No, that is very true because that is the biggest confusion. Even we, as a therapist to talk to parents. And I think what you mentioned is very true. We only think of the present. We don't think of the future. If you leave and just consider mobility as a part, that can actually continue to damage your inner structures. So that actually should help in clarification. So, So the next question is, what is the prognosis in multi-level single-stage surgery? And when is it ideally recommended for children with CP?
Okay, so for those who are not aware, so multi-level tendon surgeries are surgeries like we do at 2 or 3 levels. So when the child is walking on toes or when the child is walking with knees bent or hips flexed, so at that time we would want to lengthen some musculotendinous junctions at around more than 1 level. So classically, these surgeries are needed in older kids like 5, 6 years old when they have got their second growth spurt. So suddenly the child has grown in height, the bone has grown, but this spastic muscle failed to catch up with this bone. And hence, this is the time when the surgery is needed. The prognosis is really good because if we correct, so this is like a secondary problem. If we correct these deformities at this level, we avoid problems setting in at the bone or the joint level, which would otherwise need a bony surgery later. So I think by doing this at an early age, we enhance the mobility, we aid in doing the therapy much more better. And probably there are much higher chances of avoiding a bony surgery later in future.
Yeah, that's very true. Very true. Okay. All right. So you mentioned in your first question, we may want to consider the role of orthosis also, if it can help. So when is the role of orthosis recommended?
So when so there could be different orthoses, like we all know that the commonest one we use as an AFO for
Yes,
the feet. Yeah,
correct,
then there are, yeah. So I think the AFO we can always use till the child has a flexible ankle and there is no fixed toe walking, or there is no fixed contracture at the ankle level where where the heel is going up for the
correct,
parents' information. Yeah. So till that time, it is really good. For the early age group, when the child just starts walking, a hinged AFO is a really good and recommended orthosis. For the knees, yes, we would need a pedirap or a push knee splint depending on the amount of hamstring involvement and the knee flexion contractures. And I would recommend the knee splint should be worn only probably at night time and during a 1 hour during therapy time, particularly for some strengthening exercises or some functional exercises. And upper extremity also, again, I think they all should be considered after age 6 or 7 because the natural history of hand development takes place till age 5, 6. So I prefer to leave the hand like splint free till that time because till that time the
correct.
child keeps on growing and any movements or triggering the child to get like being in a static splint is not going to be
Correct.
much helpful. Mm.
Correct. 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 So what about spine when you talk about spinal orthosis?
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, so like the GMFCS 4 and 5, they would probably need spinal orthosis. So when they're, so if suppose there is an asymmetric involvement and one side of the muscles of the back are spastic, that is hypertonic, and other side of the muscles are weaker. So that's when the spine starts curving. And if
Right.
this curve is again not a fixed curve and if the hip joint is in place, a spinal orthosis can really help maintain the position and prevent further progression of the spine curve. So that would be a really good time to wear a spinal brace. And again, that has to be worn only during daytime and sitting, not while sleeping or not while all the time. So I think the
Okay.
spinal orthosis helps in maintaining an upright posture while sitting and prevents further progression of the spinal deformity. And there is a hinging of the ribs to the pelvis. So more the
Correct.
curve goes. So that has to be avoided because once that the rib cage starts touching the pelvis, then we have a lot of pressure in the intra-abdominal region. So which
Yes.
can be bad in terms of digestion, breathing, so, and it can lead to pneumonia or constantly vomiting, regurgitation. So, again, those are some points which we should consider while advising a spinal brace. A floppy child, a hypotonic child, again, would need a spinal brace.
Right. Right. Very true. So, okay. So, yes, today's topic is about holistic approach. Now, as an orthopedician, how do you define holistic approach when we talk about management of CP?
Okay, so for me, like holistic approaches, I would actually consider more of the so it's like being with the child since they first see us till they are growing and they are like independent and doing some things on their own. So for me, it would include like right from beginning, asking them to start with a basic NDT or therapy and then give them some surgical advice, help them with getting to a special school is also what I try and do with all the kids. So it's not just mainly focused on medical management. You must be also
Right.
aware that I have my own NGO along with one of a young person with cerebral palsy. And
Correct.
we create a lot of awareness about cerebral palsy and we help people get job placements and we want people to have a good career, be independent, be confident. So I think not just medically treating cerebral palsy, but also treating the overall it's like we should approach towards their lifestyle and life rather than focusing on the deformities and the spasticity. Yeah,
Right.
and there could be like when we talk of holistic, I mean there could be other modalities of treatment. Like some parents, they often ask, can we go for Ayurveda, homeopathy, or acupuncture? Some different type of therapy modalities like matrix, and all, there are so many things which are available. to the extent of stem cell therapy. So I think they don't come in my purview as a orthopedic surgeon. I just leave it up to the family because they want to do everything for the child. For a family, a holistic approach could be totally different. For you and me, it could mean to
Correct.
help the child in all the best way possible. So anything
Right.
else you would like to add to this? Because I think this is a very big
Yeah, it's
term and
a broad term.
yeah,
I agree. But
yeah,
we can have, so I would call it a support system. A support
yeah,
system which
exactly.
takes care of your medical part, which supports you
Hmm.
for your educational, and eventually a support system, as you rightly said, who can help you to get into society, who can help you with your vocation and independency. So if we
Hmm.
categorize this, and if we can subdivide the professionals, for the medical we would have, a pediatrician who is a mandatory person, a
Yeah,
neuro, so these three
yeah.
will, coordinate with the rehab professionals and
Hmm.
occupational therapist, speech therapist, and a physio, as and
Yeah,
when the child needs. And we shouldn't forget the importance of parent training in all this. And
right.
when we come to education, again, inclusion or non-inclusion. I mean, in a normal setup or a special setup, we have to take a call, and not to forget the role of a social worker, and NGOs who are helping
Hmm.
so many people once they grow in adult, to eventually help
Right.
them to be mobile and active, be active in the community. So I think if we can categorize, this is how I can project when I talk about holistic approach. And
Hmm.
there are a lot of teams, who will work with the child, and the everlasting would be the family. Without family support, we
Yeah.
may not get ahead. So that is how I feel. So I can see a question here: treatment process for plano-valgoid feet with enough flexibility.
Okay. So a plano-valgoid feet, if we are talking about plano-valgoid feet here in CP, we are not talking about the regular normal
Yes,
plano-valgoid feet. So a plano-valgoid feet in CP occurs when the child has walked over a period of time on toes and there is a break in the midfoot joint which causes the sudden planus and valgus. So there's a break in the midfoot joint and the foot starts going into valgus because now there's a talus and navicular. So talus starts subluxating. So all this time the weight was on the mid-tarsal joint, and once this subluxates, it goes into a valgus foot. So if the feet are flexible, we could place them in a very good molded kangaroo splints with the AFO. So I think they could have an insert along with the AFO. And I would suggest that if there is a good dorsiflexion after locking the mid-tarsal joint, so a
correct.
midfoot joint can show us wrong dorsiflexion. It can give us a false feeling of good
Yes,
dorsiflexion. So we need to supinate the feet and then dorsiflex and see that how much the ankle can be taken in dorsiflexion. And if there is a good 15 degrees of dorsiflexion, yes, a AFO is going to help. But if there is an equinus deformity, then yes, in early ages, a small gastrosoleus recession procedure can help correct the length issues at the joint level because the calcaneum is constantly getting pulled up because of the TA tightness. So that second option would be a procedure. And in older children, even if they are flexible and if the talonavicular joint has uncovered more than 50%. So this is like a hip thing. So again, the navicular looks like a pelvis and the talus looks like the femoral head and it starts subluxating. So
correct.
when there is a more subluxation, that would need a bony procedure again. So otherwise the feet are going to go outside. And feet is very important for walking. If we don't have
Balance.
a
Yeah, correct.
like a good heel strike or a good flat foot strike, or a good straight foot progression angle, we could have total instability at our first initial contact. We could have problems with balancing. We could have problems with even push off. So plano-valgoid feet, when the feet is turned outside, when you want to lift the leg and go ahead, the push off gets affected. So a plano-valgoid feet affects all the events in a gait cycle again. So I think depending on the age, any of these three procedures can be offered.
Okay. So the next question I can see here is, what is the recommendation in terms of orthosis after triple arthrodesis for GMFCS4 child?
Okay. Yeah, so so initially just orthosis can be worn after triple arthrodesis only for a couple of few months. So after doing the triple arthrodesis, the child would remain in plaster for around 1.5 to 2 months. Then the wires come out, and then there's a last plaster which can be if it's a GMFCS 4-5, the child won't be walking, but yeah, we can take him on a standing board, get him on an upright position. And AFO can be worn for 3 to 4 months. That's it. After that, we can discontinue because already the joints are in a fused position. And I don't think the AFO plays any role after that.
Right, right. Very true. My next question was also about mid-foot break. So you have already covered that, so we can skip that.
Yeah, right.
So my next question is, there is always a debate between whether we should go for PMFR or we should control with orthosis and rehabilitation. You know, when we talk about milder cases to moderate cases. So what is your take on that?
Yeah, so now a PMFR is a percutaneous myofascial release procedure. It is similar to the single event multi-level surgery, which I spoke about before. So if the contractures are not if we don't see that the particular joints are fixed in an angle, that means they have not progressed to a contracture, they can always be kept in a orthosis. But if there is a contracture, then it's important to go for a lengthening procedure. Only advantage of doing a PMFR is it's a percutaneous procedure. It needs to be done with a very expert person who's good at doing this procedure, preferably ultrasound guided. So it would give really good results. And if the contractures can be corrected, then there is no problem. I mean, we can always correct the contractures and wear an orthosis.
Right, right. So there is one question which has popped up here. Dystonia, a dyskinetic child, 14 years of age, having epilepsy with eye movement. Should he go for surgery of contracture release?
Okay, so it depends on what contractures they're talking about. So usually the dyskinetic muscle surgeries don't really work well. So if the child is ambulatory and single leg involved, suppose if it's dyskinetic and only one ankle is going in a equinovarus and there is difficulty walking with the walker, then yes, that surgery, a minimal guarded surgery would be helpful. But I don't think much surgeries help with dyskinetic CP. Plus, we have to understand that again, the epilepsy is again additional comorbidity in terms of giving an anesthesia and also post-operatively. So the pain or anesthesia or post-operatively, there could be more convulsions. So it depends how much it is affecting their function. So, and it can be planned accordingly.
Right, right. The next question is, would AFO do any harm to the feet if we use it for 6 to 7 hours?
So 6 to 7 hours is a very good time to use. It won't do any harm. But if you wear it constantly for 24 hours, it's going to cause wasting. Wasting means the muscle girth is going to get, you could have different girth of muscles if you're wearing just a AFO in one leg.
Correct.
So there could be the muscle losing its circumference is what I mean by wasting.
Right, right, right.
So 6 to 7 hours is a good time.
Sorry, I got connected. And anyways, we need some level of mobility also. So, we should encourage that mobility as long as, we want to maintain that alignment of the joints. So it has to be very balanced approach, both active and passive.
Yeah. And I think we should have the sole free most of the time in terms of sensory and proprioception issues also. Because otherwise, all the time the feet, if it's in the AFO, the sole might become very sensitive and have more of sensory issues again. So.
Right, right. Okay. What are these? Okay, I think I'm getting a call, so I got disconnected. What are the strategies we should look at improving hand function when it is a child with hemiplegia?
Okay. So what I would say that, see, of the hemiplegic child, like I said, the normal and the function develops maximum till age 6. So whatever we can try to work and get as much as normal function before 6, that is very good. We should not push the child more in terms of splinting therapy or plastering. And so I would suggest we can do a constrained plaster. So if we put the normal limb in maybe a scarf or a bandage or an arm pouch sling or a plaster and ask the child to use the affected hand, there are studies which have shown that by using that hand, there is an indirect development in the brain also. So that causes an indirect stimuli for the brain to develop well. So we should in fact encourage to use the affected hand much more before age 6. After age 6, we can always consider injection botulinum toxin or splinting, functional and static splints till age 10 and 11. And a tendon transfer or tendon lengthening procedure should ideally be done at age 11, 12 when the child is grown in height. Because upper extremity is very much complex and there are a lot of muscles as compared to the lower extremity. And we need the child to be really very smart in terms of intelligence, cognition, to understand to use the transferred tendons. So doing it in a smaller child will never yield very good results, and it's frustrating for the therapist also to teach the child. Like if we are transferring the flexor to the extensor, we have to teach the child to use the flexor as an extensor now, which is little difficult. So that's why I believe the child should have very good cognition and good selective motor control, no dystonia again, and good age is like 11 and onwards. These kids do very well with the hand transfer surgeries, the tendon transfer surgeries.
Right.
Yeah, I think that should be good. And you asked in terms of improving the function also, right? So I think one of the thing is constraint induced therapy, which I think is really good in terms of improving function. And maybe you can add some therapy related strategies to it.
Complex, body part, which will need a whole gambit of things to be considered. And I think we had this question in our previous live session also, where we have to consider so many aspects when it comes to tone, the passive range, the active range, how much voluntary control the child has, with how good the sensory motor system is, in terms of their body awareness in that hand. And again, the alignment, if there is any shortening or if there is any risk of developing deformity, there is. So I think it's a whole lot of screening and assessment, and your rehabilitation would change based on that. When is the right time for the surgical intervention or medical intervention, or even in terms of rehabilitation. So there are n number of approaches, with basic therapy to kinesiotaping, from sensory integration to orthosis to so many n number of things. But I think all it needs is a very strong screening and, focusing goal-oriented strategies to improve the hand function. So one last question from my side. In post-surgical rehabilitation, what are the key pointers to remember? Now, the reason why I have asked this is because many of the children had got operated in the month of March, April, and now they do not have access to the therapy part, and even if they had to follow up with the orthopedics and all, they're kind of stuck. So what are the key things to look at, especially in context to post-surgical rehab?
Yeah, I think we had this question in our first lockdown drill. There was a parent who had these issues. The plasters had just come off. Yeah, correct. So I think the ones who have just recently got operated and they are still just out of the plasters, they should, I think the splinting time should be more, what we discussed last time. And we use this time to consider splint as a plaster and just have an extended plaster. Because they don't have access to a therapist who's going to teach them the exercises, which are totally new post-surgery. Because now if the child was all the time in equinus or a flex knee, and now has got a good neutral ankle or a straight knee, needs to work on strengthening of the antagonist muscle. And it would be difficult for the parents to understand that. So I think the splinting time should be more. And probably if along with the therapist on a video session, if they could do supervised standing or supervised mobilization or doing some very basic exercises at home, which are not very complex, I think that could help. And I think this is the only thing. Lockdown is really an unfortunate thing, and video consultation for physio is much more difficult. I know you must be facing that. So.
No, you are right. We have to look at very simpler things. End of the day, it shouldn't be too technical that, we end up doing wrong things and increase the complications. So we would emphasize more on positioning, at least let the child not deteriorate, and, carry out basic movements which are mandatory to maintain the alignment. And slowly and steadily, hopefully, once the parents also get acquainted with the handling, we can increase the complexity slowly and steadily over a period of time. I think we would emphasize more on the physiological part and, the positioning part in terms of diet and basic positioning, so that the child is not just there that way. So I have covered my 10 set of questions, and we had a couple of questions online as well. So what is the takeaway message when it comes to managing a child? Something you want to tell the parents?
Yeah, so I think takeaway message is the parents, like we discussed, like today, the whole thing is about holistic approach. So everyone has to take this entire process of being with a CP child as a very normal process and look at it with a very positive approach. And like I said, we have to always work on making the child what the best abilities he has and help the child bring out those abilities, rather than comparing them to some other child who's of their same age group or somebody studying in their school. So because every child is different and everyone has their own limitations. And I would suggest that the CP kids, like we call them special kids, they are really special. And we as an entire team of healthcare professionals and the family, we all want to have work together and make as good as possible for the child and help them and guide them in terms of career and in terms of studies and in terms of their future planning as much as possible. I think we all need to be just together in this and not lose hope at all.
Correct. Acceptance, and having an affirmative mindset and being sensitive end of the day. I think these three things are important, even way before medical and paramedical and so many other professionals come into play. So we all have to be affirmative, positive, and very sensitive end of the day. So thank you, Dr. Chasnal. It was again insightful. It was productive. And for an experiment, we changed the time, and we will get the feedbacks. But I could see many people could still join in. It's not an odd time, honestly, considering the weekend. But anyways, all the days are weekends right now. So it's not making much of a difference, as long as it's not, pushing their dinner time or something. But anyways, as you have already told me, we would continue this live series in the long run also. And we would take up any topics if clients or any parents, majority of them want to address. So whenever we plan this next month, we will go ahead with that. So a big thank you once again to you, and thank you to the audience to share and put up their questions. So thanks a lot. Stay safe, stay good.
Yeah, thank you everyone. And once again, thank you, Dr. Harish. And I think we'll put up this session on YouTube again, and people can always go back and have a look. Yeah, so I think more people will be benefited even if they have missed out on this.
100%. Thank you so much, Doctor. Good night, everyone.
Thank you. Good night. Bye-bye. Good night. See you.